Now for a really top-class attacking effort by Emil Sutovsky from the European Championships 2012, which demonstrates some of White's possibilities in the situation with the fully occupied centre. So when Black plays d5 directly, the game started with a Ruy Lopez, where Sutovsky picked his pet variation with the immediate d4. Black played bishop g4, bishop e3, and now bishop h5. This is one of a number of continuations here for Black. h3, and here Black played directly with bishop g6. It should be noted in general in these positions that the pawn on e4 isn't quite as weak as it looks. So, for instance, you go here after bishop e3. Knight takes e4 allows bishop d5. Now that's not quite the end of the story, because after say queen d7, bishop takes d5 followed by e4, Black's going to regain some material, but certainly White often leaves that pawn undefended for long periods of time. So Sutovsky continued his development, knight d2. Queen d7. Again, Sutovsky just indicates that if Black were to take on d5, or excuse me, on e4 now, after bishop d5 takes, there are twin threats to this knight and to this pawn. And after this, d takes e5, Black is in severe difficulties because he can't recapture on e5 in view of the tactical weakness of his queen. So after knight d2, queen d7 was more sensible. Knight h4 and now d5 immediately. So an extremely aggressive move, but one which certainly backfires slightly. Sutovsky suggests instead bishop takes e4, and after knight takes e4, bishop d5, bishop takes h4, bishop takes e4, and f5. He analyzes the position to a slight advantage for White after bishop d5 check, king h8, queen h5, bishop e7, and now this interesting move using the vulnerability of the e7 bishops. So bishop f4, bishop f6, takes, bishop e5, and king g8 with a slight advantage for White. So a long variation, but one which just demonstrates that White, I suppose, has enough compensation for the pawn after Black takes on e4. So perhaps fearing that Grigorians played the direct d5, but this move is, you could certainly call it extremely ambitious, perhaps ill-advised insofar as Black is completely opening the play in a situation where he's immediately losing his light square bishop for a knight. It's also in a situation where the white rook is already powerfully placed on the e-file. The white bishop is very effectively placed on this diagonal as well, and overall White just has a small edge in mobility which isn't really felt in a more closed position, but when the position completely opens, that small edge in mobility tends to be magnified, and that's what happened here. Sutovsky took on g6, took on d5, took on e5, and now went for this very tempting continuation with bishop c5. Sutovsky actually notes that bishop d4 was even better. Knight c6, knight f3, rook d8, and now bishop e5, where white retains the two bishops in an open position, because black can't afford to take on e5, because after knight takes e5, after queen d6 or queen e6, queen f3 just increases white's advantage in mobility to decisive proportions. So it seems that would be objectively best, but bishop c5 was certainly very interesting also. Black played knight d3, exchange on e7, now knight f3 using this pin, rook d8, and rook e4. So black played knight c6, clearly knight takes b2 wasn't possible in view of queen e2, so he played knight c6. But this is a position where the bishop on b3, the, I suppose, famous Spanish bishop, is pretty much as good as you're going to see it. It's on a very strong diagonal, aiming at a weak pawn on f7. Incidentally, black's kingside pawn formation is definitely quite compromised here, in that the g6 pawn is also a target, I think, in view of the pin on the f7 pawn. And also, white is, again, just a half step ahead in his occupation of the central files, and Sutovsky manages to create a queenside weakness and bring his remaining pieces into the game in very instructive fashion. So queen e2, knight c5, black's still struggling for good solid squares for his knights, rook e3, and now queen f5. And Sutovsky just notes that taking on b3 wouldn't solve all black's problems, because after rook a8, b4 just has this permanent weakness on a6. White dominates the e-file. Rook d1 could be considered, although the rook is also very well placed in the a-file, and this is just suffering for black. So instead he played queen f5, but now white preserves his very strong light square bishop, and after a4 opens the second front on the queen side by creating a weakness there. Rook b8, pawn takes b5, pawn takes b5, and now this rook is guarding this pawn, which means that it's distracted from its duties in the center and on the king side. So knight e5, black played b4 and knight g4. If black were to take, then rook takes e5 is just extremely unpleasant, because the knight's attacked, and if it were to move, then the b pawn would also be attacked. So instead of this, black tried to eliminate his queenside weakness, but now white retains another piece for the attack. Queen g5, queen c4, rook f d8, and now white brought his final rook into the game. Rook a1, knight a5, queen e2, and knight c6, and Sutovsky managed to find a direct win here, which queen f3 is the start. So the knight is attacked. It doesn't have a lot of tempting options of places to go. If, for instance, it went to a5, then taking on b4 just looks immediately decisive, because black can't afford to weaken his back rank. In view of continuations like this, so queen d5, but now there's this tension between the rooks guarding the back rank and the rook protecting the queen, which means that white's able to start with rook e8 check, and now after king h7, kind of an unusually beautiful finish with rook e5. So this is a very aesthetic mate, and black went for the other main continuation, which is knight takes e5, which ran into white's other idea, which is knight f6 check, which is quite a beautiful finish. So here black resigned because after taking on f6, king h6 doesn't change anything. Queen h5 check and queen h8 check is mate. Now it should be noted that subsequent to this game, black's defense was improved. So if we go back here, instead of bishop g6, Morozovich against Sutovsky in the Russian team championship took on d4, played knight a5, bishop c2, knight c4, bishop c1, and now d5, certainly with a pleasing degree of central stability compared to the game. But overall, I think the game confirms what many of us would suspect initially about positions with a full centre, which is that it tends to be rare that black's able to get away with playing d5 without making any exchanges in the centre, simply because white tends to be slightly better developed going into these positions, and that lead in development becomes magnified in positions with a completely open centre. Although certainly it took some very creative play from Sutovsky to demonstrate that in this game.